Okay, so before the break, we kind of went over where the site was at, and it needs a repeat order button, which a relational database is a great way to repeat orders. So we set up a plan for the relational database. Everything kind of matches. For the class examples, I apparently didn't have any arrays here. So I am storing the price. Normally something like a price I wouldn't store there. I didn't have any other arrays in the class example. I think I meant to put some there when I was thinking it through beforehand, but I try not to think too far ahead about our in-class examples. And that way little mistakes happen and y'all can see how to fix those little mistakes. I plan them out, but I don't sit down and go through in excruciating detail. And that way I let mistakes and errors happen, because that's one of the something you all need to see, right? What an error message looks like and how to deal with each particular error message as we see it. So we have this plan for a little database that we can go put together now. So the other day we looked at a couple ways to do this. We have the PHP My Admin Software. This is probably the most common graphical user interface to work with the MySQL database these days. So most of your domain hosting sites will work with it, or it's free. It's open source software, so it's free. You can modify it any way, free to use. You can modify it any way you want in order to fit your needs. If you're a programmer and know how to modify code, it's completely open. You can just, instead of downloading the app, you download the source code and adjust it to fit your needs. When you know how to program open source stuff, is really, really nice. Then all of our software is customized to our needs. There's a lot going on in the interface. Sometimes those can be overwhelming. So sometimes I just go with the command prompt. Windows X, whoops, I held it too long. The Windows key and X, you get a list of the administrative things to do on Windows, and hitting C will open the command prompt. And with the install of XAMPP, so change directory, wherever you installed the XAMPP directory, mine's just on the C drive, there's a folder in there called MySQL, and in that folder, there's a folder called bin, and then bin has the actual MySQL app, so we can also get in that way. MySQL, and it's hosted with the local host. And I wanted to do this to remind you about this, because this one's important. When PHP My Admin Software is already connected to that database, if we navigated to this folder and double clicked on that application, it would open up already connected to the database. But our PHP script that we'll be writing here in just a moment is not already connected. It is not connected to the database. So we have to pass in that connection information. So I just wanted to pull this up again to point at that, and then we can do the old command prompt style of interacting with it, which sometimes I find myself doing just because these interfaces are so overwhelming. Right? There's a lot of things that MySQL can do. So an interface, a graphic interface that has buttons for everything SQL can do, has a lot of buttons, and it's easy to get lost in all those buttons. But we have the basic things there. You can click around, and if you want to create a new database, I'll just do one here, like test database, hit create, and it'll create that database for us. Then we can add a table for it. Test data with 4 columns will work. Create that table. Oh, okay, go. Sometimes the labels and buttons look a lot very similar here. So then we can do things like test ID is an integer, all the features for that, like name is varchar, length of 32, and create our table in the form. I'll just hit save. And oh, it did go ahead and run that.
Are you doing anything with the ERD that you just made, or you're just using it as a reference for what you're doing right now, the filling in
Oh,
those?
no, not yet. I was just quickly showing some buttons. So you can use those buttons and text fields and everything here and use the interface to create your table.
Okay.
I was just pointing that out, Tiff, that maybe you don't want, if you don't want to, we have that functionality to use the buttons and the interface to create all of it instead of typing the code. Now we're going to go do that code stuff. But when we're testing and debugging stuff, there's a good chance we're going to end up with bad data in there a few times, right? The test, there might be typos or something. The test isn't going to work right. And then we'll have bad data in the database. And that's only going to confuse us. So you want to be quick to drop the tables or the database. So what I like to do is set everything up in a way that's easy to recreate it. So here locally, I have the ability to create more databases. So I'll go ahead and include that. And just if there's bad data in there, I'll come up here to the top level, hit the checkbox, and just drop that database. So however you want to create it's fine. What I'm going to do is create a text file and do it all in a text file. And that way I can just upload that text file over and over again. Just the creation, make the database, the tables, insert a couple test values, and then it's ready to interact with our form. And it's just like one quick upload to recreate it if needed. So what do we need to do? We need to create database and give it a name. I'll call it Blue Pen. That seems like a useful name. And I mentioned there, sometimes on domain hosting sites, they want to create the database for you. You just ask them for a database and then they'll tell you the name of it. And then you create your tables in that. So if you do all this in a file locally, and then when you go to upload it somewhere, like Infinity Free, if those who are using that site, it won't let you run the create database command. So you would keep the same file there and just comment that out afterwards. Just comment that line out if you don't need it in a particular setting. And like always with our code, it's a text file, but if we give it the right extension, the computer will recognize a whole lot of SQL commands and change colors on them for us. I'm in the right folder here.
What does the paid version of Infinity Free? Because I have Bluehost and Wix, and I haven't done anything with that, but I love Infinity Free. So what does the paid version offer?
There's a lot of stuff. Infinity Free, the reason I pointed you towards that one is they show ads on the back end. So we have more than showing ads to a programmer or the web developer. Pays for features that we would normally pay for. But there is more stuff when you pay for it. You get more size, more support. I believe they're related to Blue Gator is a popular one. But there's lots and lots of domain hosting sites. There's no shortage of them. So I need to save this, and I'm just going to call this initialize DB. And I find it a lot easier if the colors change in the text file. So giving it the extension .SQL, the computer will then know or expect it to be SQL code and change the colors accordingly with some of the keywords. Not all of them, because like we talked about the other day, there's different flavors of SQL. SQL is a category of languages. So some of our keywords for MariaDB here might not change colors in Notepad++, or they might change colors in Sublime, but then not the words that would work in, say, an Oracle database wouldn't. So there's some slight differences in the color thing, but it gets us pretty close. So now we can recreate that database. I'm going to put that over there. I'll put the browser here and look at that diagram. Maybe those pictures are in the way. That's in the way. Okay, so there's our first table we need. So we can just type that right in here. So create table, customers, and it's going to have an email. Oh, I forgot to put a type here. And personally, if I have the diagram there, I update the diagram immediately. That way it's still, everything's still valid on the table. Yeah, so I forgot to put the type there. So an email, well, we don't know what people's email addresses are. Email addresses can get long. But I'm just going to go with 32 characters for us here. I guess a lot of times I go with 128 for emails, which is a lot of characters. But I have seen some really long emails over the years, so we might need a lot of characters.
It's a long domain.
Yeah. There might be several sections in the domain name or an entire company domain, the entire company's name there for people's work email. But for our example here, I'm just going to do 32. But normally I do 128 for that. Our test emails, I was going to use @here.com. So I know they'll all be like name @here.com. So they'll all be short for our example. But maybe put a little thought into how much the size you want for an email. Oh, and then that's our primary key here and foreign key elsewhere. So might want to make sure that one doesn't end up empty, which shouldn't be much of a problem because our script's going to do this every time, right? We're not going to have a user manually enter this data in. All the data will be put in from a script and read back to a script. So there's not necessarily going to be human interaction. I usually leave off the not null thing, but it doesn't hurt to require it. The site admin might forget it or something. So email, then we need a password, which is a variable number of characters. I'll say up to 32 characters again. And then the user's actual name. Again, variable number of characters, up to 32 of them. So we'll create that table. Then we need our other table. A little bit more going on here. But it's still, we can just type it in the text file and do any editing on that text file, make sure all that's right. And then we can upload it and recreate the database with just one file upload really, really quickly.
I like this stuff. It's finally something that is like, we're learning it, but it's familiar because everything else is just kind of like eyes bulging out and just looking at the screen, like trying to take it all in. But yeah, I like this.
Have you seen it before? Yeah, we see the same stuff over and over and over again. But you had a whole class on this, right? You were probably that way for that SQL class, weren't you?
Yes, I was just like this.
Yeah, so it was confusing then, but now you know it, so that part's easy. We'll just work it into the new stuff, and the classes continually build on each other. Or the stuff we're covering in class today is built on what we covered Tuesday. So everything just keeps building up. So order ID be an integer, our primary key, set it to auto increment. And in MariaDB, what we're using here, it's auto underscore increment. That's one word that I always look, that's one of the first places I look to tell what flavor of SQL I'm using. Because
did you say that version of Maria is the free one? There's two, right?
Yeah, there's more than two. But the original MySQL, there was two. There's way more than two nowadays. MariaDB is the more popular one. MariaDB is what WordPress uses, is really why it's the more popular. Because yeah, it's a huge chunk of websites are built off WordPress. Then we can just fill these in. So email, varchar 32 will be our foreign key. Our price will be type blob, because that's an array. The logo is a string, so variable number of characters, go up to 32, go up to 128 of them. So it could be a long string there. In week 7, the logo might change to an image. And in that case, we'll just save the link to the file where that image is stored. What's next? A color is a hex color. So I'm just going to save it as a string instead of integers. 8 will be plenty. We actually only need 7 characters to store a hex color. Then a grip. Well, it's a short list. There's only 2 things it could be, so I'm going to stick it as an enumerator. And either be a grip or no grip. The clip, again, is a short list of things. The pins are either going to have a middle clip or a plastic clip. And I think because of the way
does it have to have a clip, or what about no clip?
I didn't leave that option in here, but from the way that sentence goes together, plastic, I think clips would make more sense than clip, right? With metal clips or with plastic clips. I'm going to put the S on there. It wasn't earlier. Well, actually, I'd have to go through and adjust all the code. So to avoid adjusting the code, I'm going to put the same words in the enum that are there. But yeah, okay. You could, if you want to make a no clip option.
Okay, question for you.
Yes.
So when you've got a radio button, you're just going to have that enum, because it's going to be one.
Yeah, that's when I use those.
Now, when I've got something and I'm looking forward to our thing for class, where we have a choice of any of 3 flavors, or I didn't pick one of Baker's choice. Do I need a field for each one of those things as a yes or a no?
So an enum would work. What I did in the example, when I put the example page, did a practice run at it. I think it's this one. What I did is I put those in an array. Let me open this script. So as long as it gets the right results in the end, that would work, what you just said, Joe. But what I did personally is I put each one of those words in an array. So there's like a cupcakes array.
Right.
And that has whatever those checkboxes are: chocolate, red velvet, carrot cake.
Right. And I can pick I can pick anywhere from 0 to all 3.
Yeah.
Because they're checkboxes.
So what I did is I put that as an array, and then I just passed that in. Where did I write? Oh, there it is. So on my insert query, I just passed in the whole array. And then when I go to read it back, I think this has it.
It reads back, yeah, because what you did is you looked at your string for that, plunked in whichever ones were positive. But for database purposes and capturing which ones they picked and which ones they didn't.
So I stored it as a blob. I just used it as a blob because I was thinking there's no need to have human readability in that database. that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Oh, so anything that I've got as an array, I make a blob.
That's what I do.
Array
Because
equals blob.
this database was specifically made to interact with the web page through scripting, which means we don't need human readable form in the database. If there was a human going to read what was in that database, that would be different, right? Because if there was actually going to be a person looking at that data
Well,
and doing
speaking of
stuff with
that,
it,
how would it look if you exported it? Like if I needed to, as part of the admin of the server, if I needed to, let's just say, have a report for the customer and I needed to export into a spreadsheet, how would it look?
we will look at that.
Okay.
But yeah, so typically things on web pages, I go ahead and assume that there's no need for human readability. I go ahead and assume that if a human ever wants to read that data, they can look at the web page and see it. And if there's no need for human readability, it's easiest just to store it as the binary form and then bring back the binary form. So
then you would just have a cupcake type,
Mm-hmm.
a cupcake type blob or cupcake type field with the character type blob.
Yeah. So here, I'll go ahead and answer your question and the one Tim just asked there and see what it looks like. So if I go ahead and open MariaDB, it'll look different in PHP My Admin because they formatted a little. Actually, I could pull it up here. So in PHP My Admin, if I go in my test little database here from the practice run, when I did that and go to orders, you can see that it just says there's a blob. But if I go in this old way, old command prompt way, so change to the C drive, the XAMPP folder, my SQL folder, the bin folder, and start MySQL. And use database. What do I call it? Becky's Baked Goods. Nope, that's not what I called it. Show databases. What's the type? Something wrong. Use. Oh, I don't need the word. Use Becky's Baked Goods. We go and select cupcakes from orders. So there's what it looks like. It serializes so we can see what index in the array stuff is. This has index 0 and index 1.
Oh.
Some other information about it. This processes it back. But over here in PHP My Admin, we can see this just says it's stored in binary form. It's like, okay, there's 22 bytes of ones and zeros.
And you said later we'll be able to see how to export all that? Or would the customer, or would I just have to, I mean, there is a way to.
There's a way to export it, because I just didn't put it in human readable form.
Right.
The human would never need to read it, and if they did, they can look at it from the website.
Because once I started looking at it, once I zoomed in, because I had to switch to my phone, once I zoomed in, I could see, the list. But looking at that, I mean, before I did anything with computers or IT before this class, I wouldn't have understood it. So yeah, being able to export that in human readable form.
Yeah, do I have any good ones on here? I cleaned my database up before class. Oftentimes I will store images in a database in binary form. And if we went to view that, it would just show the binary. It would just show, in best case, base 64 encoding.
Makes sense. Okay.
So when we store stuff in binary form, it can be a bit iffy what we get. PHP arrays, if we store those in binary form, it's still storing Unicode values so we can see them. But you kind of have to know what's going on with it to make sense out of it. But yeah, that is just whenever you're setting your database up, ask if a human is ever going to need to see it. And for web stuff, remember, they can view it on the web page. So they don't, even the site admin doesn't have to go in there and look at it in the background. They can just have a script to pull all the data straight up to the web page and see it in the final form, formatted final form with the fonts and colors and everything, and look at the data in the right form instead of just arbitrarily. Does that answer all those questions? It seems like I talked for a minute and might have drifted off.
I appreciate,
As well as I can expect for the moment.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, it comes down to how you're going to need that data, right? And a database is a thing for a computer, and a human does not have to see the data. That's so we can store it in whatever way we want, and not have to worry about whether somebody's going to look at it or not.
Data needs to become information.
Yes. So like in your DBMS 110 class, examples were probably something like at a dentist office, right? The database for a dentist office, the lady sitting at the front desk is going to pull up people's data and need to read that every time, right? Or the dentist is going to need to pull up people's data and see how things went at their last appointment. So that data would have to be in human readable form because somebody's going to look at it. But here, we're going to send it to our script before anybody sees it. So we need it in PHP readable form, not human readable form. But as long as the data is stored, we can still access it. If you would prefer it in human readable form, you just put it in as strings, and that way you can still see everything. Yeah, okay, so you can go back to.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it just depends on what you need and what you want to do with it. What makes the most sense to you? I was kind of going through the way I do it.
Exported it without it being in a string. It's just going to export it as data that I'd still have to translate.
Yeah. It's just whatever fits your needs, and makes the most sense to you, because, well, making sense is a big deal too, right? Because if there's an issue, you're the one that will have to go in and fix it. So you're definitely going to want it in a form that would make sense to you. Does all these forms make sense? If you haven't seen blobs or enums before, it's still passing in enums. We're still passing in a string. It's just, we know it's like on a radio button. It's either this string or that one. So we might as well only pass in those two strings. Or the blob, it's coming from a script and going back to a script. So I'm just going to keep it in this form that I need it in that script, and not have to do anything, not have to pull out the data, turn it into strings and numbers, send it to the database, and then when it comes back, put it back into an array to work with. So I just kept it in the form I needed it in, is what I like to do. As long as a human never needs to see it. So finishing out our table here, we have a quantity, which is an integer, how many they ordered. And then we have an order date. And we have lots of ways to store these. I'm just going to do a date time. That'll have the day and time it was placed. That seems like a straightforward way to do that. So that will create our database, our customer table, and our order table with one import, basically. And I like to have, personally, I like to have a little bit of data always there just in case. Basically, there's two fields I always go ahead and insert. I'm not going to insert anything in the orders table, but I want to have a couple customers there to work with. And for class reasons, we need a couple customers to test everything with, right? So I'm going to make some insert queries for test customers, basically. We saw these the other day. Insert into our customers table, and we'll insert the email, the password, and the name.
You want to make a customer singular, I think, because that's your table name that you got up there.
Thank you, Joe. I also typed in Pascal case. And SQL is not case sensitive, so we can type it any way we want. But PHP is case sensitive. So since these tables were created with a capital C, when I ask for them in the script, I need to type a capital C. It doesn't happen as much on table names, but when we insert the data, our field names that will make a difference. PHP is case sensitive, so it's going to want the field names the same way we created them. So values, a couple I almost always do is set up some sort of admin account. So pass in an admin, and I'm just going to keep the emails easy for testing. I'm just going to call through all the emails like admin@here.com. And then their password, I'm going to come back and do the password in just a second. And then for a name, pass in admin. And I type the word I was saying. The passwords, though, that's a security issue, right? And you might remember a couple years ago, there was some big issues on security breaches, and it was an election year, so people in Congress wanted to yell at somebody, so they yelled at Google, and Google was just kind of like, we're just the ones that put ads on the page. We don't really have control over that stuff. But they can do a few things, and one of the things they can do is if there's a spot to enter a password, Google has, that they ended up doing is, if there's a spot to enter a password, Google has a bot that will send a password and then ask the computer what it just sent. And if it comes back non-encrypted, Google will pop up a message box that says there was a security breach. They're an advertising company, right? It's like if you see an ad for a lawyer on a bus, that neither that lawyer or the person who put that ad on the bus has anything to do with the bus route, right? But everything came down on Google because they're the well-known ones, and they had to do something that was within their power. So we want to encrypt our data. Encrypt password in MariaDB. We have a couple options here, and we are going to talk about encryption next week. So this is jumping ahead again. There's a password function, but that just encrypts it on the other side. If we need to use it, we'll pull it back out. I don't see the page I was looking for. Oh, that's what I searched the other day. Oh, it's fine. The password doesn't have a decryption one with. If we just use the password function. Can I get up to the previous page? Ah, there it is. This is the page I was looking for. Maybe. Oh, there it is. So if we want to use the password function, we have to take what the user passes into the box, send that to our database, and have the database see if it matches. There are some other methods that will allow us to encrypt and decrypt it. Encode and decode, or the DES version. I like to use the AES, encrypt and decrypt. That's what I was going to recommend for class stuff, and we'll see that next week. It's not a security class, so I was just going to point you towards this method. But it's advanced encryption standard. It's a very common one, uses 128-bit codes, 128 bits to encrypt the data. And that way our passwords are still held secure. So when we pass one in, we'll look at what that is. So where we go to fill the password field, we just ask for that function. So AES_encrypt, which is built into the SQL. And then in parentheses, we need two strings. The first one is the password we want to encrypt. And since this is just test data, I'm going to make it the same as the name to keep it easy. And then a string to encrypt it. So I'll do like SDEV 253. So it's going to use this string to come up with a numerical value, and then use that numerical value to scatter around the code for admin. And then when we want to get that back, we just ask for AES decrypt and tell it what string that was encoded with, and it will undo that encryption. So I'm going to copy that a couple times. I just hit Control-D to duplicate that, just to have some test users. I also usually do like a guest. So I almost always have a guest and an admin that would have like the lowest level of privilege and the highest level of privilege. Those users automatically include. And since we're doing stuff, I'm going to go ahead and add a third, maybe a fourth one. I'll do two more. I'll do, let's see, Sally. That'll work. A customer named Sally. I'm going to make her password Sally, and her email sally@here.com. Just to have some easy data to test with. Because obviously that can be deleted later after all the testing's done. What's another? Maybe a user named Bob. Bob's not good at secure passwords, so his password's going to be Bob, and his email is bob@here.com. So that gives us everything we need to create that database, right? We create the database, create the two tables, and then upload some test users so we can get all the testing done. And I'd like to save that in a script, and that way to create the database, all we have to do is come over to PHP My Admin and make sure we're at the top level here with the breadcrumbs and import that file. So choose file. And as normal, I was talking the whole time I was typing that. So first import here, I guess, is just checking for typos. So initialize DB, and we'll hit go to run all the queries in that file, which is normally much quicker when we're not on a Zoom call. But there's the database. So I click that. I have a customers table with 4 rows of data, and an orders table with nothing in it yet. And there, you can see what it did with that password. It kind of mixed up the symbols and changed all the encoding for it so that it can't, nobody can read it unless they know what string we use to mix up those symbols. And we know what string we use to mix up those symbols, so when we ask for it back, we can just unmix them. And we have some test data to work with. So now we should be ready to connect to the database and pass in some orders information. Whenever we hit the button to make sure that goes in there, okay. Does all that make sense? You probably should have seen something like that in your DBMS 110 class, right? do it all as a file. And
I
that
don't
way
know.
you-
No, we did it right. I think we did it mostly right in the
In Oracle, right?
right in Oracle.
Oh, okay. So if you want to, you can do it all right here. But we can save it as a file and just do it all at once. The same SQL commands, it's the same code. It just, we write it in a different place. And this can be a big time saver when we're testing our scripts, because if the script goes wrong, any bad data in the database is only going to confuse us. We want to get that back out of there and recreate the database pretty quickly.
I don't remember ever doing create database. Do you? We always did like create table. And...
Well, no, we had to have a database first, but that was like that's like one line.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a one line. It's a one line entry just to say, I want a place to put all these tables, and this is what I called it. And then it's like buying a lot, and now you got to start putting buildings on the lot.
Exactly. And sometimes domain hosts will create the database for you. So if that's the case, just comment out that line to create the database before you upload it to their site, and then only create the tables. I'm going to leave it here. That way I can, if something goes wrong, I can drop the table. I can just drop the whole database and recreate it, test users and all. And then after the testing's done, I can get rid of all the test users. But we need a way to access that from our PHP script. So there's a number of different ways. Our textbook seemed to like the MySQLi objects. Those are very popular. Oftentimes I use PDO objects, which were briefly mentioned in the textbook. I decided to use the MySQLi because there's a lot more reference for that in the textbook. And that's what W3 Schools has a lot more reference to. But the PDO is really nice because it works with any database. Obviously, as the name implies, a MySQLi object is specific to MySQL. Let me go ahead and set up this line. So like DB equals, we need a new MySQLi object. Did I misspell that? No, MySQLi, and then we'll pass in the connection details. Another object we could use is a PDO, PHP database object. And like, you can see from the name, MySQL only applies to MySQL database, whereas this will work with any type of database. And all we have to change, we just change one line of code for that. So a MySQLi object, and I'm pull up the reference material. We've seen official reference material a few times, right? On php.net. There might be some other things that it looks really nice in tutorials and well put together things, but remember those get outdated quick. You always want to check the official reference material. And yeah, so here's our constructor info on our constructor, what we have to do to create one of these. And basically we just have to tell it what database we're connecting to. There's a whole bunch of things there. We don't need all of them. Oh, here in the constructor. So we need to say what host we're connecting to, then our username, which that's exactly what we typed into the command prompt to access the MariaDB that way. The host was localhost and the username was root. Or if you're on a domain host, they will give you that, that information. If you're using the AWS setup, the host is your public IP address and the username is the server name. So we need the host, the username, the password for it, and what database are we wanting to connect to. So we need 4 things, which we could type right in here. It's localhost, root, a lot more coming. But we would have to do that every time we need to access the database, right? And type in those same things every time allows a lot of space for typos. Or another way to look at it is we're going to type those same 4 things over and over and over again. And that's the exact purpose of a constant, right? We're going to use that a lot. It's never going to change. So if we could sort in a variable, or that is really kind of precisely what constants are for. So I'm going to store those in constants. And normally I would do it in its own file, just the PHP tag. And I usually call it like connection or DB connection, something like that, and just import that file.
What are you making this new for?
I couldn't quite hear you there, Tiff.
You just lost me. You just made this new file, whatever it was, right there.
Oh, I was just a side step. So normally I would put this stuff only in a file by itself. But remember, we were kind of talking about the other organization scheme, just to see different ways in class. Like at the beginning of class, we put everything in the library file. So we only have to import that one file.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to put it in the library file. I just
okay.
kind of sidestep there for a second. But normally I would put these 4 values in a file by themselves.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was asking, what the file was for.
Yeah, your audio is messing up, Tiv. Didn't I have a library file? Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. I should be in this folder. There's a library file. So just like the functions that we might need.
Wait a minute, are you wanting to be in, wait a minute, are you going to be in 5 or 4? Oh, that's right, you're in 5, that's right, because you swapped, you moved 3 to 5, okay.
Yes, I copied
So damn confusing.
3 over. Yeah, there's files everywhere. This needs to be cleaned up. Are you kind of following where it's at?
If you mean me,
okay. Yeah, there's files all over the place, and we've seen more than one way to put this together now. So I'm going, as much as possible, I'm going to stick with this. Copies of the module 3 one, or next time it's going to be copies of module 5. So next week, we will also have to see a unique one again. So this one will be back in week 7 and 8. But next week, we'll have a unique one again. And yeah, these files kind of add up to a mess, but it'll be copies of things and try to label them clearly. But here, all of we want to do just anything that needs imported in the same file. So I'm going to put some constants here. And we've seen how to define constants, right? Way back in chapter 1, we'll define a constant called db host to store the word localhost. Define a constant db user, and unless you changed it on your version, the default MySQL username is root. We'll define a constant called db password, and unless you changed it, the default one will be an empty string. And define the database name, the actual database we want to use. And what do we call that over here in the initialize? Blue pin. So the database that we created to put all this data into. And you could type this every time you need to access the database, but there's a lot of room for typos if we have to type this every time, right? And after everything's ready, when you go to upload it to a domain host, they'll tell you what the host is. And likewise, your username and password, you'll know what they are for that particular hosting site. And if they created the database for you, they'll tell you what the name is. So all you would have to do is come in here and change what these 4 constants hold to match the particular instance of the database you're on, depending on where you're running this site out of. So here in class, we're just doing it on locally. So it's just localhost, the default MySQL username and password, and then we just created a database called Blueprint. I'm going to save those, and then over here in the confirm script, I already have that imported, so we have access to those constants. So then I can just pass them in here. And look over here one more time at the order we need them in. So remember, whenever we ask for a new object, we're calling the constructor method. That's what we saw last week. So when we call the constructor, it wants the host first, then the username, then the password, then the database name, and some other stuff that has default values. So we don't necessarily need to pass that other stuff in. But host, username, password, database. So when I create a new instance of that object, I'm going to pass in those constants. So db host, db user. Did I call that user or username? Anybody remember? Okay, I just called it user. Username might have been a better one there. Then our db password, and then our db name. So we'll just pass all those values in to connect. And that way we don't have to type them every time we want to connect to the database. So that allows us to connect to the database. And then we have, after we connect to the database, we have all the values we need for it in variables right here. So after we find all those values, I'm going to build an insert query right here to pass to that database. I'll actually spell it out. I'll call it insert query. And that needs to be a string. Then we'll pass an insert query like those ones we saw with our test data right in as a string, which is a little easier to maintain if we build that up in sections like we saw with our confirm message. I'm going to do that. I'm going to start, well, I'll go ahead and start with those first words because I know they go there. So insert into, well, might as well put the table. Insert into orders. That's the first part of our insert query, right? And then I'll just build it up from there. Insert query, because obviously insert queries kind of look like a mess. So putting it all in one line is very possible, but it might be a little tricky to find problems if they arise. Then I'm going to add to that string, insert into orders. The next thing is the fields we want to insert into. So we have a price field, an email field. Email was first, wasn't it? Look back at the picture. The order ID, the computer will handle that. Then we have email, price, logo. So email, price, logo. What else is on the picture? color, grip, clip, color, grip, clip, quantity and order date, I think. Quantity and order date. So I'm just looking right back at those pictures. Looking right back at the plan for it. So that's the second part. The fields we want to insert into. Did you have a question, Tiv? So your audio might be cutting out again.
Sorry, no, that's I'm driving. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I heard just some noises. I couldn't tell it. I thought it might have been the audio cutting in and out again. So insert into. These are a mess, right? Let me show you something I like to do. I have an insert query right over here. I'm going to maximize this so it doesn't word wrap. And here at the end, I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to write the query I want. So an email, price, I get a picture. Price, logo, color, grip, clip. Logo, color.
Are you putting all those on one line, you said? Your example?
I was splitting it up. I was just going to bring this other thing over here for a reference. Because
I see.
already,
I see
it's going to be, it's going to be a mess, right? Putting this together. So what can be very, very useful is go ahead and make a practice one. Quantity and order date. And then our values, we can start passing those in. So like the email is me@this.com. And it's just completely a practice one that we can refer to while doing that. Or maybe actually run a practice query. So we need the price is an array. So I'm not actually going to run this. I'm just going to type a reference for it, an array, which is a SQL type. You can also pass that in, but there's some different ones, logo, and I'll type all this stuff up and then copy and paste that, or have a version of one that works and that we know works before putting it in the script. So for example, if I come back over to here and I will actually run a query. So I'm going to paste that in here. Then I want some test values to put in there. So like me@here.com. A price, I'm just going to put a couple numbers in there. I'll just put some numbers in there. It'll be fine. That's going as a blob. And there'll be an array when we go to correct it. But a test run to make sure everything's right. And then we can modify this to fit our code, because it's confusing. It gets a little confusing working it into the code. So what's next? The logo. Logo goes here as a string. The color is a hash key, so or not hash, a hex color. So we start with the hash key, followed by some hex digits to represent the color. I think everybody's seen that on CSS pages a few times. Our grip is either grip or no grip. So I'm going to put in that word. The clip is metal or plastic. I'll put in one of those words. Quantity, I'll pass in a 1. And order date, I'll just put in today's date.
Was it metal or metal or metal? Was it metal or metal dash clip? was trying to remember how you put that.
You're correct. It was metal dash clip. That would have not inserted. So let's say 21-4-22. I'll put the data in that way. I think that's all right. So I'm going to hit copy so it doesn't disappear on me and run that to see if that works. Nope, there's an error. So it's good to fix those here. Unknown price. Didn't we have a price table? Price field? Orders. Yeah, there's price. I don't know why I didn't like that. Did I spell it wrong? Somewhere over here? Price.
Well, you had as a blob, and I don't know, you have to put in anywhere different as a blob, or?
No, this is just saying what field it's going into. I retyped it. Maybe there's a typo I wasn't seeing. Unknown column price in field list. Oh, I'm on the wrong table. That should be an order table, shouldn't it? That's why it's a good idea to do this first. Because if that would have happened in the code, that would have taken us forever to track down, right? So hit copy to put it back on the clipboard. And go. Okay, it did run. So I can check and just make sure everything got put in there correctly. If Joe hadn't pointed that out, that one would not have gone in there. The clip field would just still be blank because it would only accept the stuff from the short list. But that query worked. So while that's on the clipboard, now I'm going to go back over to my code and I'll paste it in as a comment and then copy the pieces from this I need. So like, instead of trying to type it directly, I'm just going to have this query I know works and copy over that. And all of these parts work. Well, pictures are in my way. There we go. Then all of the field names were good. So I copy that, put that here with a space afterwards. Or you could do this as one line if you're going to copy and paste like this. Next is just the word values. So I'll just type that in directly. And then the actual values we want. I can find a spot to move the thumbnails out of the way. So insert, query, concatenate assignment with all of those to start with, the closing parenthesis, and then a SQL command needs a semicolon, right? So this happens a lot. We put a semicolon for the SQL command, then close our string and a semicolon for the PHP. And now I'm going to come back and put escape sequences on those quote marks that are here, the same way we saw the other day. If we start at the end and come backwards, it won't change color. It won't change to the right color until we get to the opening quote mark. And eventually everything should look a little bit better. I guess this one's, the colors got off somewhere anyway. But I know I want all these quote marks in. Oh, I forgot a quote mark for the string. So yeah, everything that goes in as a string, we still need to put a quote mark in for the SQL query. So we might need escape sequences for that. But that was just test data. I don't want the test data. So like right here, I want what's stored in the email field. And we're in a loosely coupled language, so having those in variables, we can just put them right in there. We don't have to ask for it. This one we'll have to kind of break out. So break out of our string, concatenate some stuff in, because this is where that array goes. So what I'm going to call this method serialize. Did I spell it wrong? Serialize and pass in the price array to that. So serialize the price array. And serialize is just a term for write it in binary, storing it in binary form instead of text form. All the files, all the writing, the files and stuff we've seen so far just writes it in text form. So if we still want it in binary form, we just call this serialize on whatever we want to pass in. And then unserialize when we get it back. So then the rest of it should be easy. That was the only one we had to actually change because everything else is right in a variable. So for like the logo, that is stored in a variable called logo. Or this color, that was just a test color. I want what's actually stored in the thing color. Variable grip.
I have to ask about those hex and numbers for the colors. Do we use it as a string because it's a literal?
We did it as a string because it's 3 integers. A color is 3 integers. So if we kept it as 3 integers, we would need 3 fields in the database. SQL doesn't allow us a spot for. Yeah, it doesn't allow us a spot for multi 3 integer hex value of color.
Okay.
So turning it into a string makes it's just an easy way to work with. Then this one represented a quantity.
Make sure we put commas.
I'm sorry, what, Tiff? I couldn't hear that last part.
No, and then just make sure that we put the commas between numbers.
And then for the date, we don't want that random date. We want to actually pass in the PHP date. I guess we need to break out of the string and concatenate some stuff. Y'all remember the function for dates in PHP? Or really, I should say any of the encoding. We need a way to get the date, right? Anybody remember the string encoding for that? There's lots of them. MySQL will recognize most of them. What's a good way to pull this up? Yeah, usually we put the year first. Actually, here's what we want. We want it to look like this.
Okay, so the year is a capital F for 4 characters. I remember that.
That's one of them. That's capital F or capital Y works. F, then I think we want a lowercase m and a capital D. Let's see what that gives us. That was right. I was thinking Y, a capital Y, an M, and a D. There's more than one way they'll give us the same results. we can come back and adjust it afterwards, because it might take a couple test runs. But does this part make sense? Notice how I didn't try to type that all in to the code with the escape sequences and variables and all at once. I made a test one, then I copied and pasted from that test one and then replaced the parts that would change.
Okay, and the quantity has no quotes around it because it's an actual number.
It's an integer. Yeah. I think we might be able to get away with that out of the dates, but I don't think they'll hurt anything if they're there. I had quotes on the test string, so I'll leave them in there. So now whenever we run this query, we build up this query string, and we have an access. We have a variable that connects. We have this connection to our database. So we should be connected to the database, and we have our query built up. So we can use that object and just pass in the query. So the easy one is just that object has a thing called query. And we saw this last week. In most of our languages, we use the dot operator more often. But in PHP, we use the pointers on our object. So in most of your languages, that would be like db.query. We have a pointer, so we're saying the dd object has a method called query, and then that query is expecting something to be passed into it. And we're going to pass in that insert query we wrote. And then this will return some results. In case of an insert query, that's going to say how many rows were inserted, right? So hopefully it's going to return a 1. So we can check all that, but I want to try to minimize what goes into the class example. And for an insert query, we don't necessarily need to see our results right here. We just need to see if it worked or not. So I'm going to come up here and save all. Let me take this out so I don't mess anything up. Come up here and make sure everything's saved. And we should be able to place an order and see it show up in our database. I'm going to delete that test data. Okay, get rid of that. So our table's empty. So let's see if this works. What do we have? We have me at this.com. I'm just make up an email address. I'll say Chris's pin. Pass in some blue color with caps and order 3 of them. So I'll leave both of those unchecked. Hit order. No error messages, right? We would have gone to the apology page if something went wrong. So there's what our order looked like. If we go back over to the database and reload this page, hopefully there's some data in there. No data went in there. Did I forget a step while I was talking? There's specifically an insert thing. When I was getting prepared, I just did queries to make it simple. Let me see what I did over here. I'm gonna double check this, see if I did anything fancy there. I don't think I did. That's for stuff later. Oh, there we go. Insert query, built that up, and close. So it must have made. We built up the query. DB object passes that in, and then we close it, which should have still inserted it. insert into orders all of these things, space, the values, email with quote marks, serialized price. I don't need quote marks there, don't have quote marks there. The logo has quote marks on it, the color has quote marks, the grip has quote marks. I'm gonna let's see what the database sends back. Back, run that order. It did not echo anything. I'm checking, make sure I'm in the right file. Oh, not that one. 253, the class examples. Module 5, the confirm page. So required a library, which is here. And it has some constants. Localhost, root, empty string, and blue pen. Blue pen, the orders table. Sorry, apparently there's a typo somewhere, but I guess this is probably a good thing to see because this is what happens when something goes wrong with the queries. We basically get nothing. So I'm going to work in some echoes to see what's there. I'm going to echo back the DB object. Go back over here. Whoops. I go back, is stuff. Okay, there's stuff on the form. So I hit order. Oh, at least got an error message this time. Let's see what the error message says. Probably says I can't turn a DB object into a string. Yeah, but it is a DB object, right? So I guess it created the right object. What's the next thing to check? None of that changed. It's better to check and see what that insert query looks like. Go back over here, go back. Taking this, versus pen, give it some blue looking color. And this can get a little tricky at times trying to track down errors. Oh, that might be a problem, right? Is the original query, I typed in this 2021-4-22, and I capital D is apparently the day of the week. Is it H? Let's see what this one does. Reload the page. Nope, that's that. I have no idea what 9 is. Probably Greenwich Mean Time. Is it lowercase d instead of capital D? Does anybody remember what that meant? Oh, there it is, a lowercase d. So did that insert it, or was it another problem?
No,
Oh, it's built in and insert that. And let me double check what I did on the other form. Insert into orders, table orders, blue pen, yeah. Email, price, logo, color, zip, clip, quantity, order date, the values.
what is that? What's all the A2, S3, blah, blah, blah? That looks foreign.
That is the array.
Oh, that's the serialization of the array. Okay.
Yes. Maybe I need string quote marks on that. Let me throw in some quote marks there. Backslash quote there. Backslash quote before the comma. Let's see if that did anything. Oh, did I erase that line yet? Go back in this line I erased. DB runs, calls the query method for the insert query. Reload. That put quote marks around it. Let's see if that made a difference. Yeah, I was really hoping this wasn't going to happen here because you can see it can be a little tricky to track down the errors when you don't have any warning error messages or anything.
It's nice to see it happening too, though, because it helps us figure out how to investigate it. Happens to me all the time.
Yeah, but you see, unlike normal, we don't have any PHP errors. We don't have any MySQL errors. It just didn't insert the data. So I'm going to double check what I did over here on confirm.php. And you just have to go through line by line until you figure out what it is. So build up the string db dash db has query, run that stuff. So there shouldn't be anything fancy going on there. Host, username, password, name. So does that look different? db equals new MySQL I, all of that stuff. That looks good. And I think I have the right values over in the library of localhost, root, an empty string, and blue pen as one word. So that should be the right numbers. So I didn't mean to put those after the error handling. So I always want the error handling to be the first thing, right? That way, if if there's an error on any other line, it still catches it. I meant to put those down there. I just copied and pasted them down. That looks good. Insert query. Well, maybe doing this will help. Okay, copy and come over here. This is the query results were showing. I was able to echo that back. Paste that in. Oh, missing a comma. Oh no, that one's, no, it's not. I was thinking that was two different things, but there's a space there. There's the query. What happens if I just hit run here?
The cryptic, you messed up and we can't tell you how, but we just know that it didn't work.
Yeah. You have an error in your SQL syntax near cap. Where was cap at?
That's right near where the serialize happened.
Oh. There's extra strings. So using double quote marks, when I serialize that, it has quote marks as well. So I'm going to come in here and change all those double quote marks to single quote marks. I'm going to put my cursor right before it. Right up here, right at the beginning of that line. And hit Control H. In any place that has backslash double quote, I'm going to replace with a single quote. And instead of doing all, I'm going to do them one at a time to make sure. Find next. It's right on there. I wanted it up here. The cursor up there. And find next. Oh, it's going backwards. So put the cursor before it. Hit find next. Replace that one and that one. I'm just going to delete that one. I don't think I need that there. Well, it'll be fine. Right, that one and that one, that one and that one, that one and that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. Is that all of them? Okay, yeah, it's down there now. So there were more using double quote marks ended up causing a problem. And so it's a little tricky to track that down because we don't have error messages or anything. So let's clear all this out. Come back over here. So our table's empty. And if I reload that same order, the PHP doesn't give me any errors. Over here, hopefully it's there now. It still didn't like that. So I'll try just pasting that insert query we built up in here. I'm gonna try this. Well, yeah, I'm gonna try that. And see what happens. Do we get an error message here? Yep, apparently. So it said it didn't like things near the date. Nope. Oh, I had an apostrophe in there this time. So y'all have seen things like this before, right?
Like what?
So what happened is I put an apostrophe. So put the message to say Chris's pen.
Oh, okay. So it read it as a single quote, like a
Yes.
closing quote. Okay. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So what I need to do is there's an add slashes method we could use.
Because you're still going to want that single quote. I mean, you're still going to want that apostrophe there, but not read as a single quote, right? So you're going to have to add a special character for that. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. So we just need the backslash character. So what I'm going to do is the user is going to be entering text. And I think now that I see that I put that error in immediately, there's a good chance somebody's going to want that on their message. So that might show up in other strings. So I'm going to add this add slashes. So whenever PHP reads that string in, it'll put that backslash character in whatever string it is. So we don't have to pull up the string and type it in manually. The other two strings, the grip and the metal, those were being passed in. Colors, the user is not going to type anything there. So that was the only place where a user might type a string in there. There shouldn't be quote marks or apostrophes in an email, right? I don't think we can use, I think we have to have alphanumeric characters, and there's only a couple other things. I don't think we can use quote marks in an email. So that'd be the only place where it shows up. Let me try that again. Come back over here to cancel out of that halfway ran thing. And reload this. And through the form. And now we can see there's a backslash by that. So that method add slashes puts in a backslash. Hopefully it worked this time. There it is. So I was hoping that wouldn't happen because you see it's not the most convenient thing, but hopefully maybe that is a good thing. Make sure you allow time.
Looks like your date came up. Looks like your date came up bogus though.
It did. Let me try something. Good catch, Joe. But yeah, so having seen that, whenever you go to do your homework, make sure you allow time for tracking down errors without warning messages, or have to do roundabout things to get warning messages. Update, did I just call it date? Wait, update orders. That wasn't there a date field? What do we call that?
I thought you called it date.
I thought they did too.
Or a small order, big D, small 8. Order 8.
Oh, I was looking for the name of the field.
That's what I was looking for. Order, or that was delivery. No, it was delivery date. In our table, it's our order table is delivery date.
Oh, delivery date. That's why. Yeah, let me pull up the create thing, which was over in this folder. Yeah, so you can see it's not the easiest thing to deal with when problems happen. So right off the bat, be very slow, careful, do that copy and paste thing. Oh, order date. That's why I can't find it. Order date. There we go. Set that equal to 2021 for 22. That's what our string looked like, right? Oh, 422. So where order ID equals, is that number 1 or 2? I think that was 2.
2.
Well, I was just looking for an error message there. So if I come back over to copy that so that I have it around. Don't have to retype the whole thing again. So yeah, it did not like that. Order ID number 2, it did not reset it. So it doesn't like spaces in there. So let's try pasting that in, and I think it'll accept dashes in them. Run that. And look at the data. Okay, that time it went in. So we need dashes in that string, which was here. So y-m-d. Now if I come over here, try a different order. Here's one of my test users. Some random clicks. Yeah, all that's probably fine. Hit order and see if it loaded in the database this time. Okay, that one looks a lot better. So that's it. You saw it's kind of problematic when it doesn't work, but once it works, it's going to work every time. That does all of that make sense? Because we do still have another query to run. So might be some bad data in there, so I'm going to go.
I know it makes sense about why you copy and paste the pieces that you know work. I mean, you can put one little bitty typo and spend the rest of your day looking for it.
Yes, yes, that makes a big difference. Make a practice one, do a practice insert query, and then adjust that from something you know works, because yeah, it gets a little messy when we put them together. Go, just be slow and careful, and then once, if it doesn't work, print out echo statements, and well, you saw what we did there. Print out the result of that, and then paste that in places where we will get error messages. And it takes a little bit of time, so make sure you allow for that time. But once it works, it should work. So if I come over here and drop that table to get rid of the bad data out of it, I'll drop that and then come to import, and everything's in that text file. So I can recreate it really quickly just by importing that file. Initialize db.sql, run that. And we have our table back. Our database, the tables to put it in, and some test data. So now, in order to test this stuff, I want to use one of the test users. I'll go with Sally at here.com and place a couple test orders so we can see if the next part's going to run. And that echoes out of there. So if I go back to home, or order page, Sally, logo for a pen. I'll just put some arbitrary sentence in there. Add a color. Click pens with a rubber grip. Or several of those. No error messages. And if I come over here and check the other table, and yeah, you do have to reload this is a web page, so you have to reload it if you change the data in the database. So it looks like that all went in there good. We can make a couple orders just to test things. Go back to the order page. Again, Sally, that way we can do everything. I'll just put in message. Pick like a purple color this time. Caps with metal clips. And she wants 2 of those. And if we come over here and reload the database, all right, it runs much slower or much quicker when we're not on a Zoom call. But you can see that's inserting the data. And now for the second part, we need to read that data back, which is a select query, right? Just sort of a select all query. So where are we going to, where's a good place to put that? So when somebody goes to the home page, they see this and click orders, and we have all of that. So what I put on, had in mind when preparing the homework assignment is, let me grab my pen. Put like a line or something, an area above it, and show the previous orders with a radio button so that you can click that radio button and get that previous order back. Does that make sense? And if that basic idea makes sense, in order to do that, we need to know, whoops, I gotta close the pen. We need to know how to identify the data. So we need the email address when we get to this page. So what I came up with a quick workaround, because we won't see logins until next week, is put an email address here on the home page and then pass that in as an alternative way to get to the order page, which is going to cause some changes, because then we'll have to do the orders page as a PHP thing. So I think unless there's another big issue like that, we should be able to finish that in about 20 minutes. But we've been sitting here doing this for a while, right? Do you want to take another like 5-minute break just to look away from the screen for a moment?
Okay, yeah, I can pick up the pieces of my brain that have exploded all the way across the room here, and maybe put them back into my head and try again.
Yeah, because normally we have that lab time at the end, but we still have this one more section that I want to cover, which shouldn't take as long, because all we're going to do is pass in the select query and then loop through the results. So it should take about 20 minutes, but let's step away from the screen for a moment, because we've been here for an hour, almost 2 hours since our last break. So let's take 5, and then we'll get started again at 4:20. Does that work for everybody? And yeah, like look away from a screen and blink a couple times. So I'm gonna stop the recording while we do that, and we'll get back to it in 5 minutes. So see y'all in just a moment.